Welcome, everybody, to the So Says Shernoff interview archives. I'm Josh Shernoff, and this week's episode features an interview that has never been heard before with AEW star Brian Pillman Jr. Now, I conducted this interview back on February 1st, 2020, and Pillman was a part of the MLW roster, but what he has to say is really evergreen. So with that, let's get to my interview with Brian Pillman Jr. Brian Pillman Jr., thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to jump right in.
All right, Josh.
You obviously, second generation, you are the promised prince here. At what point in your life did you say to yourself, I am going to follow in my father's footsteps, I am going to enter the professional wrestling business?
It was a long dilemma. It was a long life of trying to do the right thing, doing what I was told, going to college, just trying to survive was my first thought. I didn't have a lot of realistic aspirations of being a pro wrestler because I just wanted to get out of trouble and I wanted to get into a comfortable household where I could focus on school and those things first. So before I could take the extra step to become extraordinary, I wanted to first become ordinary, right? I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed at being a normal person, and I went through a lot of different trials to get there and a lot of different hardships. So once I got my first job and really got settled down at about the age of 23, making a good living in the technology business, in the industry where, my taxes are paid, everything's going good. I had a house, place to live, food on the table. Then I was able to say, you know what? If I can succeed at being normal, why don't I try and be something special? And that's when I had the calling at about the age of 23 to really look into this business that had such a mystique behind my name and in who my father was. So I felt like I had nothing to lose. If all else failed, I could go back to living that normal life. And obviously I had these thoughts since the age of 10, 11, 12, all the way up until my adult life. I always had those thoughts in the back of my head that maybe I could do this, but just being so intimidated by the business and the fact that NFL athletes are the ones that are being called to do this. The people talk about the drugs and all the hardships of wrestling that kind of pushed me away. And obviously what happened to my father was quite a deterrent as well. But after getting to know myself and maturing and becoming a man into my 20s, I realized that this is the perfect job for me, and there's no better time to break into the business than right now.
So how long have you been in the business? How long have you been wrestling?
Well, I want to say I finished my training officially with Lance Storm at the Storm Wrestling Academy, which is now closed.
Right.
They decided to close their doors because they weren't going to produce a bigger star than me. So
that's what I heard.
End on a high note. Good job, Lance. Good call. But no, I took my final bumps there. Had my final practice matches, so to speak, on December 31st, 2017.
Okay.
Prior to that, I had been training under the tutelage of Rip Rogers at the Ohio Valley Wrestling.
I trained under Rip. He is a great guy.
And that's where I learned most of the promo stuff and really the present, a lot of the aspects of the business that most others would skip over. Rip didn't pull any punches, and he made sure we did everything we could. But my more formal training is, so to speak, the actual nuts and bolts of it came from Lance Storm. And right there, it was December 1st, 2017, had my first match on December 31st. 2017. Wow. So ended out that year with one match. And then in 2018, I think I had over 100 matches. And in 2019, I think I had about over 100 matches. So
I remember right now as we record this, we're in the 2300 arena, the old ECW arena. I actually remember the first time you and I met was just over 2 years ago in this building at the Something to Wrestle live show. Met real briefly, but I remember at the show, you got a call out from the stage as, hey, this is Brian Pillman Jr., and he's just kicking off. And now, I didn't know how long you had actually been in at that point. It turns out maybe a couple of weeks or a month at that point. You have managed to really make a name for yourself, which is not an easy thing. I've spoken to so many second or third generation wrestlers, and we've talked about the positives of having that name. And of course the negatives, the extra pressure that goes along with that. You're instantly being compared to your father in this case. Did you ever think to yourself, Brian Pillman Jr., that's who you are. But did you ever say, like, oh my God, these are some pretty big shoes to fill. Maybe I should put a mask on and be, whatever. Did you ever think that this might be too much pressure on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely experienced that dilemma early on, very early in my career. It was something that even Lance had suggested, just as a way to kind of protect my identity for a while. He said maybe work under a mask just for a few months to get your bearings and stuff. That way, everything's recorded, everything's online now. He didn't want me to look like a fool out there. But I had to sit down with somebody else that had gone through that second generation, somebody that had recently lost their father as well. I'm not saying any names, but sure. He was booked on a show up in Canada, up in Calgary, and so I had a chance to, during the middle of my training, or towards the end where I was really having that dilemma, I was like, oh, how am I going to start things off? I sat down with him and he told me, he said it's going to be harder for you to have that name, but it's also because your father passed and all this, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, there's going to be a lot of people that want to see you succeed, and people that love you. And he told me to follow my gut, and my gut told me that my father named me Brian because he wanted me to be named Brian, and he didn't want me to wrestle under a mask. He didn't want me to go by the name of Joe Blow or Boomer Scarborough or whatever name you can have. But
that's a great one. That's a great.
That was my go-to.
That's your backup. This doesn't work out. That's your backup.
Stole that one from Chuck E. T. He's got a list of gimmick names. But no, it was definitely something to think about. But ultimately, my gut told me that I could handle the pressure, and it's like, what more can the business take away from me, right? It's taken my father, it's taken my childhood, it's taken so much from me that now it's time for it to give back to me, right? Now it's time for these fans and for me to give back to the business, just so it can give back to me, right? Now we have, instead of the one-sided relationship where I'm growing up and no one's giving a damn about Pillman's kid, and I'm living in the darkness, going through drugs, battling with all these different things, not having a father, not having a mother that was really around. Now I know that 100% that the wrestling fan base has my back, and no matter what I do, because I'm who I am, they'll catch me if I fall. So Brian Pillman Jr., I would have never thought would have became his own. I thought I would be living in this shadow to this day. Like, I thought forever I'll never out-succeed him. But as we see recently with winning the PWI Rookie of the Year, something my father was never able to do for himself. That's already one step in my own steps, right? That's already one step in the sand different than his. My path is already, Pillman Jr. is now his own man. So,
and there's nothing in my mind that says if he's here that you can't be here. You don't have to follow that same.
Exactly.
Do you have, going off of what you had said, because it was interesting to hear that about what the business took from you, and you're something I've always really respected about you is how open and honest you are, because it is a difficult thing. The wrestling fans, they talk about, Brian Pillman, the loose cannon, all that stuff. But you're talking about, this is your father. This is real life. This isn't, has your relationship changed with wrestling? You talked about a bit, but has it changed from what you felt? Because it sounds like, am I misreading it, that you had like somewhat of a resentment towards the wrestling business growing up? Has it changed, or has it maybe morphed into a chip on the shoulder that you've been able to use?
Yeah, it definitely kind of started off that way. I was always pretty bitter about what happened to my father and the choices that he made. Ultimately, those were his choices, right? But he chose to lead a life, and he chose to be a part of a business that takes a toll on people, takes a toll on their bodies, takes a toll on their minds. And that's when I started to realize it's not wrestling's fault. It never was wrestling's fault. And for people to go out there and to chase these dreams, they have to take those risks. So I ultimately knew that if I took the proper calculated amount of risk, and if I got into this business with good intentions, that it wouldn't eat me alive, and I wouldn't end up dead in a ditch. I could be very successful at this. And you look at guys like Jericho, and you look at guys like Moxley that have made such a long living out of this. They've stayed clean. They've stayed healthy. they're not dead, right?
Right.
You know, so clearly there's just some decisions that need to be made and some lessons that need to be learned from the past. And ultimately, I love the business more than anything because it's exactly what I was meant to do, right? My personality, the way I speak, the way I walk, talk, play, wrestle, everything. You know, from a game to a sport, I'm always competitive, but also, I'm a showman, right? Yeah. So it's like a natural personality thing for me.
So we talked about some of the challenges maybe you have. What have been some of the most rewarding aspects? Obviously, you mentioned knowing that this wrestling community, whether it's the wrestlers or it's the fans, have your back, and that you have that support. But what has been in your career in such a short time, and it really is hard to believe that it's been such a short career because it does feel like you have already achieved a certain level, and I'm excited to see where you go from there. But what has been a moment that's really stood out to you as that moment where you said, that's it, this is why I'm doing this?
I always talk about the love of the fans and everything and the different energies, and you experience so many different reactions. You got some of the fans, they think they know it all, some of the people that they just love the sport or they love it as an art form or whatever. But I'll tell you what, it was a really eye-opening experience when MLW and we all went to Mexico and we wrestled in Tijuana, and you just got to experience a whole nother different passion of fan, a whole different type of atmosphere. I mean, it felt like it was the NBA Finals out there. People are throwing beer at you. People are getting so emotionally invested in what we're doing that it really makes you feel like a rock star. It makes you feel like somebody, and just to be able to go to another country and people know who I am and to know my name because of the awesome coverage that we have through Major League Wrestling. I totally felt like a star for the very first time. I was like, wow, this is incredible. So
you talk about being a star and obviously enjoying the spotlight, the performance aspect of what it is that you do. You also obviously being a part of a faction, if you will, also being a part of a tag team, just two people. Do you prefer just you? It's just you in that spotlight, or do you enjoy that camaraderie of being able to be out there with other people, being able to lean maybe on another athlete?
It was such a blessing to be able to wrestle with the Hart Foundation and to bear that logo and that name. And I think there's no one else I'd rather be out there with than Davey Boy Smith Jr. I think we have very similar stories. We have some very similar backgrounds. His father passed at an untimely time in his life, and luckily for him, he was able to be exposed to the business at a young age. He's a very, very well-versed athlete and martial artist, and I admire him so much, like to the point where I just always want to share the ring with him. But in the same token, I do feel like I shine the best when I'm on my own out there personally. But if I were to ever step in the ring as a tag, I'd prefer it be with Davey Boy.
What are some goals that you have? And there are so many. That's such an open-ended question.
Absolutely.
But what are some of the goals that you have? Some milestones that maybe you've set for yourself that you can think of that you haven't yet achieved. What might some of those be?
Everything has happened so fast, like you said. Like I've done so much and so little, and I've gotten my face out there, and I've really built quite a following. Just from the people, whether they love my dad or maybe they just saw me on MLW and they like my mullet or something.
Right.
So there's always there's something to love about me, right? There's a reason to follow my story, and I think the next chapter in my story is gonna come after finishing up what I have here at MLW. So I still have a lot of time left here, and any goals I have immediately are going to be becoming an MLW champion, becoming the middleweight champion, maybe the heavyweight champion. I'm a type of guy. I'm not a super small guy, but I'm not a huge heavyweight. So there's kind of that ground that I could compete for both. Who knows what would be a better fit. But I know I'm aiming for the gold. I'm aiming for the MLW gold, and my biggest my biggest goal is to one day sign a major contract for a full-time deal so I can help support my Aunt Linda and take care of the things that she needs to take care of. So.
Wow, that's nice to hear. If you had, you went through some tough times that you had mentioned earlier. If there's somebody watching this who maybe forget being a second generation or anything like that, but somebody watching this who they want to be a wrestler, or maybe they want to do something else. Maybe they're just stuck in a bad place in their life right now. What type of advice, because you have a platform and we have this platform here on this show, what type of advice would you want to give them since you have kind of made it out of that?
Yeah, and that's the thing. My biggest thing that I learned going through the adversities that I face is that all those things make you stronger. Adversity makes you stronger. You see a lot of these people, they have anxiety, they're depressed about this, that, or whatever. They're getting on their phone, whatever. They're sitting on their phone all day, staring at it, looking at it. They're just trying to find a reason to be upset. But if you're a person that's been through some real stuff, excuse my French, but some real shit, you've actually seen adversity, you've actually been starving, you've actually been through a lot, then you have a much higher tolerance, you have a much thicker skin. So for anybody that's out there that's facing these issues, that's facing they can't get through something, just know that when you get on the other side of it, when you finally get through it and see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're going to be that much stronger, and you're going to have that much of a thicker skin, to the point where, my childhood and the things I faced, there's no way anybody could tear me down, because I've been way worse. You know what I mean? And it could always get worse, but it could always get better. And you have to look at it that way. You have to look at it that everything you go through, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? It's a little cliche, but that's what it is.
It's cliche for a reason.
Yeah.
We'll end this on a positive, kind of fun note. You have some pretty cool wrestling gear.
Yeah.
What are some of your? How does that come to be? Is that something you design? Someone designs for you? What is? Because it does stand out.
It's a shame. I hate to talk about it, because I've got like several orders of gear. I've got so much creativity going on in my mind that I should have so much more gear than I have. But without saying any names, the person that develops my gear and makes it is they kind of shit the bed recently. So I'm like 2 or 3 designs behind, and I'm wearing old gear.
We're going to have to maybe talk to somebody else,
We're going to have to get somebody else on here, because I was supposed to have a new set of gear for this evening, but here we are. I personally, I design all my own stuff, and I send it into the seamstress and have her kind of clean it up and put it on there. But for the most part, I'm 100% in creative control of those things, and I draw inspiration from past wrestlers. Sometimes my father's gear and attire, and also different things that I enjoy. Games, movies, videos. Anything I can do. I try not to be super copycat about it, you know what I mean? I'm not Seth Rollins wearing Marvel gear all the time, it's like that's like the WWE staple, Right. We'll just take a Marvel character and slap some gear on, I'm a little more creative than that, so no offense, WWE roster, but no, I think we all, as wrestlers, we're all creative artists, and we draw from other, whether it's anime or movies or comics or whatever, we always draw from those little things, and it kind of helps us express who we are outside the ring and stuff too.
My last thing then, because what you were talking about, you said drawing from your father's stuff, the T-shirt, very famous T-shirt. Is it the actual T-shirt, or is it a different?
Which T-shirt?
The one that I'm thinking of specifically would be with the is it a lion or tiger?
Yeah. So that's a liquid blue vintage original, and those are they don't make those anymore. They're very rare. But I don't believe that to be the original that he wore. That was given to me by a supporter named Adam Barisano, who had collected all of the vintage liquid blue shirts that he wore, and like the vests and stuff. So he collected the same products, but they weren't the originals that he wore, so, but I'm still very blessed to have it,
Yeah.
It's a really cool shirt.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time, and I want to wish you the best in the future in your career. I don't want to wish you the best in your future endeavors, because, you have to wrestle tonight.
Yeah.
And I also don't have that authority to do so. But thank you very much. I wish you all the best. And
thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate you having me on here. Thank you.
That's it for the first episode of So Says Shernoff Interview Archives. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast feed for more great interviews all summer long, leading up to the return of So Says Shernoff every week starting this fall. Give us a follow on social media if you'd be so kind, at So Says Shernoff and at Shernoff Show. And give us a subscribe over at youtube.com/So Says Shernoff, where you can find a lot of this content and more in video form.
I hope you'll join us next week for another never-before-heard interview. This time, I sit down with Savio Vega. This has been So Says Shernoff, because that is what Shernoff had to say. We'll see you next time.